That's the dream. I mean, that's the dream. When the world has these VR headsets at home, that's when we can push something to direct to consumer. Until then, we're kind of like, it's very limited people that have the hardware and the know-how to like get our product at a given time. Yeah. So we're waiting for Facebook to keep selling these headsets for cheaper and cheaper, or anyone else to sell these headsets for cheaper and cheaper, so that hopefully we can get a consumer base large enough to sell.
You are the VR expert, so so what can you see the VR and AR in the future? Can you share with us what you can see in the next few years? What is the development will look like?
Yeah, I think like AR is going to have a lot more enterprise solutions. I think you're going to see a lot of advertisements, unfortunately. You're going to probably see a lot of industry training. I think it has a lot of promise for safety training or in like factories and manufacturing. I think that will be very helpful. I think the power of VR is really up to the imagination. You can build worlds that defy physics. You can build anything that you want. You can, embody any body that you want. So I think like VR is going to be the tool of the creative, of the fringe, of the most inventive and explorative people in the world. So I think the use cases for VR are going to be much more broad. And I think what that looks like is really up to us to build. I'm Max Orozco. Thanks for having me, Chi, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about my work. Max Orozco. I am from East Los Angeles. I still live in East Los Angeles. I love East LA. Let's see, my educational background. I got my bachelor's at the University of San Francisco, studying psychology and biology, and after that I kind of went straight into research. So I started looking at family systems and emotional resilience. I was toying around with doing clinical work, so I worked with children in the juvenile justice system, but I pretty much focused my efforts into academia. Within a few years, I started my career in academic neuroscience, where I used MRI techniques to map the human brain development. And just recently, I graduated with Chi at USC, the Ivy Nino Academy, and it kind of brings me here.
Nice. So also, can you seems like you go through different school to get whatever you have right now. So can you share with us about your application process, how you from the point A to
Well, I'm a first generation college graduate. I'm the first member of my family to receive a graduate degree. So I think a lot of that, especially my bachelor's degree, I remember my first semester I talked to my college counselor and they mentioned that I should take a small load, that I shouldn't be too challenged with the classes on my first semester. And as a result, I only took, 12 units or something, and I was kind of incredibly underwhelmed and bored with my first semester. So I got a full-time job. And I think in some ways it really helped me to like frame my education in a more professional manner and thinking about what I wanted to do after school. In others, it was just showing how like a lack of experience in academia just didn't prepare me for advocating for myself in that environment. Mm-hmm. So I think particularly first generation students really could benefit from mentorship or from learning how to advocate for themselves in specific environments.
Awesome. So, and then in which point you found that you want to dedicate more in academia and also to about health science research?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think I've always had the desire to build, to create. And although academia is like much slower in the pursuit of creation, there's a lot more creative freedom. So we in academia have our milestones aren't so much based on like business or product deployment. They're much more based on like what you find creative, what you find meaningful for the industry, and pursuing that. So I've always been a fan of the sciences, and so I just wanted to do my part to kind of create the baseline of human knowledge.
When in school, I found that you're very dedicated using technology to try to advance the application for the patient. So can you share with us why you have this direction and how you see the technology cooperate with the design in the future?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the world is changing at a really fast rate. And so it's the new applications for these emergent technologies are everywhere. So it's kind of finding where you think that technology is going to best fit with the human needs, and then pursuing that and seeing and being open to finding those unique use cases. With that said, I think I am very much interested in technology. But it's not just technology for technology's sake. I think it also has to link very much so with like the human element and with human care. Mm-hmm. So technology isn't always the solution, but it's finding how technologies and humans kind of interact to drive, in our case, like the best patient experience as possible.
So I know that your project is heavily involved in VR and AR application. Mm-hmm. So why are you using this medium to implement the technology?
Sure. So it rooted back to my career in neuroscience. Mm-hmm. And so one thing, I worked on a research study at Children's Hospital Los Angeles using MRI techniques again. And one thing became very clear, that kids were terrified and scared of MRIs. And because MRIs are scary, so what we would do was we would prepare them for their scan by kind of like doing play therapy. And so we use this one tool called a fiberglass mock MRI. And there's this big scale model of an MRI. It's almost like a piece of furniture, if you can imagine with it. It looks just like an MRI. And so you would put a child on this bed and push them into the fiberglass MRI. They play noises, and you kind of walk them through the experience of getting an MRI. And research really shows that it helps to improve the data quality. Kids stay still while they're in the scanner. It reduces anxiety, it reduces like cortisol levels in saliva. So there's like a actual biometric means of measuring how effective it is in reducing anxiety. So we would use this tool to collect quality information. But when I moved to this brand new, beautiful institute that had, like venture capital funding and a beautiful building, they just didn't have the space for this device. Mm-hmm. And so we were kind of left to our own devices to prepare kids. And as a result, these kids were terrified. We got awful data. It was a waste of my time. It was a waste of their time. And they were so scared. These kids were so scared that they would never participate in science again. Like if there was a research study that they could volunteer for, they'd be like, oh, is it involved this giant scary donut of an MRI? And so I think it just generally hurt everyone. So at the time I was thinking about these other tangential areas that I've always found interesting, including media. And I saw some amazing researchers, including here at USC, that were really exploring how exposure therapy and how habituating people to certain fearful situations was really helpful. And so I said, why couldn't I build a VR media intervention specifically focused for MRI? Yeah, it's still pretty young, right? But we're seeing lots of use cases in healthcare, for example. A lot of them are based on pain management or like distraction. So for example, while a kid is getting an IV injection, they're putting the headset on them, and that is helping to kind of distract them from the pain of getting that injection. Mm-hmm. And again, there's a lot of amazing research that they actually report a lot less pain. But that's kind of like I think that's really the first kind of use case and kind of like the lowest hanging fruit, because it's using distraction. But I think what the real power of VR specifically is actually engagement. And so you have this ability to create these new worlds, you have this ability to create new forms of interaction. How are you going to use that capabilities to engage with people rather than distract them from what's happening in their real environment? That's kind of why we used ReadyTeddy and our MRI preparation tool to kind of create a much more truthful but whimsical MRI suite, and then using the inherent properties of the technology to kind of train children to stay still within the threshold of a good MRI. So we're both like engaging them, we're using storytelling to prepare them for the space, and then using the kind of this amazing use case of head motion and VR's capabilities of measuring head movement to actually train them for what they will eventually need to do when they go in for their real life MRI. Two things. One piece of technology we're using is super old school. So it is actually, we have our character, this teddy bear that walks kids through the MRI and VR space. We actually have a plush, so a little stuffed animal that of that same teddy bear. So after they engage with the VR experience, they can actually take the same character with them into the scanner. So it's kind of continuing that narrative. So this piece of technology of even stuffed animals is being integrated into a continuous narrative along their treatment plan. Apart and more probably what your root of your question is asking about, like technology, what we're really creating is an aptitude test for a child's ability to go into an MRI. So we measure head motion in the VR headset, and we tell a clinician, you know, this is how much someone's capabilities are of staying still in a simulated MRI environment. This is how they compare against other kids their same age. We push it to the cloud. You know, we're doing all the analysis in the cloud, and then that goes directly to a unique URL for that hospital or for that clinician. So essentially, we're giving them a report on how that person is doing in staying
hospital,
still.
They can collect the data. Is this, they can see all the sample from their hospital, or you also will share the different results from other hospital?
So one important thing is it's all de-identified information. So we're not collecting any like personal identifying information whatsoever. All we're essentially collecting is age and head motion.
Okay.
So when you collect an age, it'll go into the pool of all the other subjects that have completed ReadyTeddy, so you can compare them against each other. But the way that's delivered is on a singular dashboard. Because one thing building for healthcare is that, particularly in the last year with COVID and the priorities of these healthcare systems, a lot of like doctors and clinicians just don't have the time to fumble around with cumbersome technology. So our focus is not only on providing good quality content to kids, but on delivering something that is easy to use as possible for clinicians. So that is at the foremost concern of our design. So that URL is just a very simple report for clinicians to interpret as they wish.
Patient for the kids. So when they need to assess the test, the simulation, so how they can get access to your software?
Right now, we're only providing the software to clinicians, to hospital systems, or researchers, and that's for a few reasons. We kind of have like a secret sauce on our development protocol, so rather than having it like open to the world, we think that it would be much better in the hands of clinicians, yeah. So essentially, like, and also there's some difficulty in providing that software to people when they need it. You know, like usually there's a few months wait list between like when an MRI is ordered and when they can go in for an MRI. So like I think right now like consumers just don't have enough headsets to go on to the Oculus store or Steam store and say like, oh, is there an MRI game for my kid? So it just doesn't really seem like an effective business model going straight to consumer. So yeah, we're choosing to go straight to B2B and straight to the provider. Oh, implementation, it's definitely fitting the software into the healthcare system. You know, for good reason, healthcare is not the fastest industry to adopt new technology. I think it takes quite a while for new tech to be integrated into a clinical protocol. Yeah, I think it's adoption, just finding users and having them kind of buy into the use case of the technology. A lot of like doctors, for example, aren't the most, you don't see them on the weekends putting on a VR headset. You know, you don't see them, that's not how they spend their time. So they don't really understand the capabilities of the technology. So a lot of it is, you know, sending out trial units. It's convincing everyone from the CEO to, you know, child life specialists or an MRI tech about like the power of our value proposition. Kind of giving inaccurate illustration of how easy VR is to use. Because if anyone's ever used like the UI systems, the user interfaces, they can be really difficult to navigate in a VR headset. So what we're providing to a lot of these clinicians is, what I'm hoping is their first and best use of VR. And because they're researchers and they know the MRI space so intimately, they can kind of see the exact perfect use case of this technology to the specific medical procedure. But yeah, again, like I think we've spent a lot of time just focusing on making the technology and how to start and implement the technology as simple as possible, so that there's no hiccups when it is our first kind of customer segment. And they understand that, just like I had mentioned at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, we use this fiberglass model to prepare people. Researchers really understand how important that is for their research, but a lot of them don't have the time or space to implement it. So we see some institutions actually like putting kids in having them lay down on a cot with their heads inside cardboard boxes to simulate that MRI space. There's one institution that is putting a Wii remote and strapping it to a kid's head, so when they move too much, it rumbles, and that's kind of them training them to stay still. So we see a lot of like industry hacks or industry just trying their best to combat this problem. And so when we reach out to them saying, hey, this is a solution that you've been looking for in a long time, and this is the old solution, and this is our new and improved solution, I think it's really taking off, and it's pretty easy to articulate the value proposition. And it's a really delicate line because kids absolutely love like VR, right? They're so excited to try this new technology and play these games. And so part of the difficulty in producing the application was, how do you keep people engaged but then keep them calm so that they can stay still? So a lot of kids are actually kind of bored by the experience because we have to make sure that the narrative is kind of stretched out enough where they can interpret the information, but also like be aware of their surrounding and absorb the information and not be overcome with excitement. Overall, like very positive opinions from children, but that's part of like our design, is that we have to, like, because we're working with kids like 6 to 10 years old, we really have to focus on how they absorb that information and make sure that they are comprehending everything that we're so excited that they overlook the messaging of the content, or they're like not actually learning to stay still, then we've kind of like missed the point of the application, right? So yeah, they're excited. How do you make sure that they're gaining the useful experience of the application at the same time?
And also, I believe that this is a really great tools for the researcher. So you can help them to provide a training to the kids, so to make them easier to finish to collect the information for for their research, and also do the researcher give you any wish list you see that will be can leverage to implement to your projects?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of like fMRI studies incorporate tasks. So you have to like remember a certain number of digits, or you have to like play these games while you're inside the MRI so that they can see how your brain activates. Incorporating those kind of like practice games into our software would be really helpful, is what we hear from a lot of our customers. On the clinician side is also like incorporating breathing techniques. So oftentimes kids will have to hold, or people will have to hold their breath for several seconds while a scan is being taken place for their MRI. So incorporating that kind of training into our software would be really helpful for a few different types of scans and a few different types of institutions. That's kind of like the most requested features of our application.
Oh, so you basically, they want you to rebuild their experience. Actually, they will do it during the MRI scanning exercise.
Yeah, and it kind of is a case-by-case basis. So we're trying to be specific but flexible. What we've already created is that generic interpretation of that. I think the next step, most of these tasks are built in a few different like coding languages like MATLAB, or using software tools like ePrime. So MATLAB is its own proprietary language to develop with, and so we'd have to like develop some sort of wrapper script to change it to what we can use in VR. But that's kind of the next step, so that we can provide like an extra set of value to pretty much. We have our research studies submitted at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, where a lot of my colleagues and partners are. We've been working with Stanford Children's Hospital, Oklahoma City, University of Florida, and the Keck School of Medicine. So it's really having the clinical studies to test the efficacy on reducing anxiety, on improving image quality, and ultimately reducing sedation rates for kids. Because in clinical settings, like sedation is very, very frequent, and there's little information to actually determine who can complete an MRI with or without sedation. So the next several months are just going to be really doing our due diligence in testing our product in a clinical setting, because our ultimate customer are these healthcare systems, and if you haven't done the research, then they're always going to be skeptical on your technology. So we have to do the right thing, and we have to do sound and proper research to confirm. I think much like based on Mel Slater's work at the University of Barcelona, I think our ideas of ourself and the way that we perceive the world, again, are very much more fluid than what we think. And so I think by creating these virtual spaces where we can embody anyone or anything that we want, it actually can be a huge tool for healing and for healthcare. Like one of our missions is, finding the right use case for this technology to really drive adoption, and then branching from there outward. How do we perceive ourselves? How do we perceive the world? And how can we use this world-building tool to foster, healthcare and well-being?
What can you see the VR and AR in the future? Can you share with us what you can see in the next few years? What is the development will look like?
Yeah, I think like AR is going to have a lot more enterprise solutions. I think you're going to see a lot of advertisements, unfortunately. You're going to probably see a lot of industry training. I think it has a lot of promise for safety training, or in like factories and manufacturing. I think that will be very helpful. I think the power of VR is really up to the imagination. You can build worlds that defy physics. You can build anything that you want. You can embody any body that you want. So I think like VR is going to be the tool of the creative, of the fringe, of the most inventive and explorative people in the world. So I think the use cases for VR are going to be much more broad. And I think what that looks like is really up to us to build. There's a lot of like child health advocacy nonprofits and groups. All you have to do is like look at their board of directors, and those are almost always entrepreneurs who had their own children have had health problems.
Gotcha.
And so they've essentially dedicated their lives to helping other kids by joining these. Favorite college tradition? I mean, I applied to Ivy and Young because actually I had the utmost respect for like the MIT Media Lab, for example. I think it's one of the most amazing institutions that are building some amazing experiences and like just cutting edge, truly interdisciplinary studies. But MIT has this fantastic senior prank tradition, which I think is hilarious. They've managed to get, you know, fire engines and police cars on the roof of their giant dome of one of their buildings without knowing how, overnight, without knowing how anyone could get a fire engine on top of a building. You know, they've created their own unit of measure of distance and all these different kind of pranks that are very nerdy and very kind of like good humored and for the pursuit of weirdness and scientific oddities, essentially. So I think, yeah, MIT and their senior prank system is hilarious.
Oh, wow. So they give the people a lot of inspiration and a lot of imaginations. They can break through different things.
Yeah, what happens when you get 5 MIT engineers and encourage them to be mischievous?
Exactly.
I mean, I think I've always held my career, you know, like every day you go in to work in academia, like you're very like scientific minded and kind of a rigid methodology. And so I've always paired that with, you know, creative endeavors and working at maker spaces and learning about, you know, different industries and softwares. So I've always kind of had that dual relationship between like scientific rigor and creativity. With that said, some of the people I really respect are at Akili Interactive. They're this one company that created the first ever FDA-approved video game to treat ADHD. So again, based on this concept of engagement, they're treating, a doctor can now prescribe a video game to treat attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So that's pretty fantastic. Another person I really respect is Mel Slater he's a researcher from the University of Barcelona. He works a lot with embodiment research in virtual reality. And he's kind of come to this amazing thesis that our perceptions of ourself are much more fluid than what you would imagine. So we can embody the body of a lobster, for example, and we kind of adapt very quickly. We can embody the body of someone of a different race or ethnicity, and it changes the way that we think about race and ethnicity. We can change different ages or even help ourselves cope with traumatic events through this embodied avatars. And then lastly is one of our my mentor here at USC, Mariantina Gotzes. She's the director of the Creative Media and Behavioral Health Center. And so she's very much focused on how games and media can help people in healthcare settings. And her work is beyond amazing. And she's a very conscientious person and very empathetic in everything she does. So.
Our audience, they want to go through the same attraction. So what is your recommendation for them?
Interesting. I mean, I think it's pretty emerging field, and so it's growing. I would recommend going to conferences, to be honest. There are now virtual medicine conferences. I would recommend SIGGRAPH. SIGGRAPH is always some amazing developers from around the world. There is... Yeah, I think I would look into conferences, and then honestly, I think if you're very interested in how media can can play a role in healthcare, I would look up those three individuals. Akili Interactive and their company, Applied VR, Mel Slater's work, and Mariantina's work. That'd be a great place to start. You can find me on readyteddy.io. That is our product, and if you hit the contact us, it'll likely hit my email. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Max Orozco, or otherwise my email is max@lumium.com.